Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new episode of our Student Spotlight series, where we're able to showcase some of the work that our past students have been doing. I'm Daphne. I'm one of the podcast hosts here at CCIR, and it's our pleasure today to have with us John. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, like how old you are, how long you've been with CCIR, what grade you're in, things like that.
Hi, my name is John Kim. I've been with CCIR since I think October of last year, so a couple of months now. I'm 17, I'm a junior, and I currently go to Del Norte High School.
Amazing, amazing. And I'm curious to hear a little bit about your background and your experience with programs like this. Was it your first time doing something like this, where you're kind of paired more one-on-one with the professor, or had you done similar things before? How was that experience for you? Was it challenging? Did it push you? How did you find it?
So this is a new experience where I get paired with a professor and we do a kind of a literature review and go through the process. I have done more of like a lab oriented research back in the summer, but this online research was definitely a first for me.
That's really cool. And I would love to hear a little bit about your topic. What did you focus on for your paper?
Okay, so the course that I took was about Parkinson's disease, and my paper um, compares like the 10 current alpha-synuclein targeting disease-modifying therapies for Parkinson's disease. Essentially, in Parkinson's disease, there's a protein called alpha-synuclein, and when it misfolds, it causes essentially neurodegeneration in a certain area of the brain. And my paper basically looked at how how plausible certain current disease treating therapies were, and those that were specifically alpha-synuclein targeting.
Wow. And what did you look at to conduct your research? Like, what did you draw from? You spoke a little bit about literature review. What were the primary things that you were drawing from?
hmm So I looked at obviously the research papers about like the trials run for each therapy that they were testing. There were about 10 papers for that. So I obviously looked at those. And there were also just a lot of other papers just on basic Parkinson's disease, such as like symptoms and like other things about that.
Interesting. And why did you choose Parkinson's disease? What motivated you to choose your topic?
So actually, when I first got into high school, I knew I wanted to research about something in the medical field. And while I was just researching online, I found that dopamine was pretty cool. And through researching dopamine, I found that Parkinson's disease is actually a disease that impacts dopamine levels in people. And coincidentally, at the same time, there's an elder home in front of my neighborhood that treats like elders with dementia, including those with Parkinson's disease. And while volunteering there, I think my interest for Parkinson's disease really fostered.
That's really interesting. So you kind of had a more personal kind of connection to your paper, which I think is really cool, definitely. Um, so how does dopamine impact Parkinson's disease? Like, can you tell us a little bit more about that for those of us who don't know anything about the topic like me?
Yeah, so there's a certain area in your brain called the substantia nigra, and it's part of your motor pathway. And essentially, when you move, your brain goes through like a series of signals that allows you to make that movement. And the substantia nigra and dopamine is one of the key elements of that pathway. And when you don't have enough dopamine, or when the neurons in the substantia nigra die, that pathway is essentially cut off, and we have a lot of problems with moving.
Interesting. And does this happen at a certain age, or is this able to happen to anyone? Is this like age motivated, or can any a child, a teenager, can it impact anyone?
So age is the biggest risk factor. People generally above 60 have the highest chance. Usually 1% of people have Parkinson's disease that are over 60, but there's a very rare cases where it could happen to people under 40 or even at 40, yeah.
And what are some of the risk factors regarding Parkinson's disease, like if you have it under 40 or such?
Risk factors, I think there are some interesting risk factors, like living in rural areas is a risk factor. So if you live out in the woods, you're more likely to have Parkinson's disease. Other like more logical ones, I guess, would be like exposure to pesticides and other chemicals.
Interesting. Why if you live out in the woods, it's more likely? That's so interesting. Why is that?
We're still not entirely sure, but I guess we could say that the runoff from pesticides from farms may like get into the woods, or like you might have less sanitary drinking water, and some chemicals in there might be able to make you more prone to Parkinson's disease later on in life. That's the hypothesis.
So it actually has to do with like ingesting or inhaling like man-made chemicals, which is kind of terrifying.
Yeah, possibly.
That's really interesting. Okay. And I would love to hear a little bit about what your study kind of concluded. Like, what were the conclusions of your paper, how you reached those conclusions, things like that. Like, what makes your paper like special?
Oh, okay. So, like I said earlier, I was just seeing which current possible therapy is the most like has the most potential to cure Parkinson's disease, essentially. And while looking at the 10 potential like candidates, um, we found that like a specific disease type, drug type, uh, particularly showed good results. So there are multiple like ways of approaching Parkinson's disease, ranging from antibodies to small molecule therapies and like neurotransmitter regulators. But we found that small molecule therapies were especially effective. And among those small molecule therapies, my paper concluded that there was one specific drug called UCB0599 that had the most potential.
Could you tell us a bit more about this drug and its significance?
The significance, I guess, would be that with like with like my analysis that small molecule therapies have the most potential, I guess research could be more focused um, to developing those small molecule therapies, because one problem with Parkinson's disease and what makes it tricky is um, the protein is very hard to target because it's inside the cell. And antibodies can't make it inside the cell, but they're very highly specific and effective. So, but small molecule therapies, they aren't specific and they aren't really effective, but they can make it inside the cell. And so, with the knowledge that one type of therapy is better than the other, we could really hone in on that and then try to make it as precise as possible in order to have the best chance at fighting Parkinson's disease.
Interesting. So it's about how the drug interacts with the body in a sense. Is that kind of
Yeah.
what happens? Like how the drug actually travels and how it actually interacts with the cells of the body, and then that then inhibits the disease itself?
For the small molecule therapy specifically, they interact with the misfolded protein and then they prevent it from misfolding or like aggregating together. That's their role, I would say.
Interesting. And so the misfolded protein is what's responsible for the creation of the disease itself. So I guess for those of us
Yes.
who know not a lot about the disease, could you explain to us what happens on a physiological level with Parkinson's disease? Like maybe we can walk through quickly the symptoms and things like that, how it impacts you day to day. But also I'm very curious to hear on a physiological level what is happening inside.
All right. So starting off with just the symptoms, obviously it's really hard to move. Like there's akinesia, bradykinesia. There's like tremors in our hands. It's like we generally have a lack of control over our movements. And as Parkinson's disease progresses, it could lead to other symptoms such as dementia. And how this happens is obviously the protein alpha-synuclein, it misfolds, but researchers still aren't entirely sure where it misfolds. There's a debate whether it happens all in the brain or maybe the protein misfolds actually inside our gut and travels up to our brain. So there's a lot of gray area about this disease that we still don't know. But what we do know is that the protein misfolds, and when it misfolds, it can get inside it starts accumulating inside of our cells, and that causes the cells to die. And it causes one specific type of cell, dopaminergic neuron, to die. And this is essentially what messes with our motor pathway.
Interesting. So this protein is actually responsible for quite a lot, the misfolding of this one protein. And is that protein then copied into our DNA over and over again, like kind of flowing throughout the body in its misfolded state? Or how does that?
So Parkinson's disease, there's genetic, it could be genetic or it could misfold like after it was translated. And so I wouldn't like in some cases the misfolded alpha-synuclein would be like copied, or it could have it could have been misfolded during the folding stage. Yeah.
Interesting. And so this drug, the single cell therapy, the one that you were mentioning, that impacts the misfolding of the protein. So it actually kind of hits the problem where it originates. So it's quite effective.
Yeah, and so there are actually many different ways to try to solve Parkinson's disease. One is targeting like the alpha-synuclein directly. Others are trying to like cure the neuroinflammation that Parkinson's disease brings. But the reason why I chose to focus on the alpha-synuclein aspect was because I thought it was the most direct, as you just mentioned.
Interesting. And I'm curious to know why, I guess, kind of what motivated you to think of a new solution to Parkinson's disease specifically? I know you mentioned a little bit about, volunteering at that elderly home and seeing how it was impacting people on a one-to-one basis, which is really, really touching. But I'm curious kind of why you chose to focus on the different kinds of therapies versus, for example, why it originates or how to reverse it or something like that, like within the body. I just want to hear a bit about like how you picked your research topic, how you went about it, what kind of inspired you, and like that kind of process of inspiration, like throughout the weeks and weeks.
Okay, so initially I think I had a hard time trying to find my topic, but um I just kept on asking myself questions. And one thing that really stuck out to me, just like I would just let myself be curious. And one thing that stuck out to me was that our professor taught us that Parkinson's disease doesn't have like a cure. Like we have temporary cures where um, we could help people to move better, but the disease isn't going to get any slower. It's still going to be there and they're still going to be affected. And with that in mind, I just wanted to look into what are like the current possible treatments that we can have to slow down Parkinson's disease, because that would be a first. I think, yeah, that's just the reason why I chose this topic for my paper, because I thought that it would be something that was pretty cool to me.
Definitely. So it's kind of like the first time that this would be kind of completed in the medicine that we have today, like the kind of the first instance of an
Yeah.
actual reversal of the disease rather than just quelling the symptoms temporarily, kind of a more conclusive reversal. That's really interesting, definitely. And I'm curious, if you had to do another research paper on a different topic right now, what would you choose?
By different topic, do you mean different topic in Parkinson's disease?
No, entirely.
Entirely? Um,
Yeah.
I would say neurodegenerative diseases always interests me. So maybe Alzheimer's, but I know that Alzheimer's is like
Yeah.
heavily researched and there actually is like a reversal drug for it. And so maybe I would go into something a bit more like less researched, possibly maybe Huntington's.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I find the kind of psychiatric diseases quite interesting. Like you know, Munchausen syndrome by
Mhm.
proxy or Stockholm syndrome, these kind of psychiatric diseases. I find them very, very fascinating, where it's kind of like kind of physiological, but also kind of psychological. It's like a kind of melding of the two. Would you ever consider branching out to different areas of research?
Um, yeah, uh, it would definitely be more foreign to me, but I would be open to it because I think just most of the things, if not everything in the medical field or related to the body is pretty interesting.
Definitely, and they're all the body's all connected, isn't it? It's all kind of they're always interacting with each other. Yeah, I also want to hear about a little bit about how you structured your research paper, and you spoke a little about the process of researching the paper itself and why carried out your research in the way that you did. But I want to learn a little bit about how the paper was actually structured and why you chose to structure it that way. Because I know with, especially with medical and scientific papers, there are a ton of different ways to structure it. So I would love to hear a little about that.
Yeah, because I did more of like a literature review, it wasn't the classical like abstract introduction methods results. I kind of had to do like, of course, I had an abstract. I introduced Parkinson's disease, like generally what it is, and then I established like what alpha-synuclein is so that the reader can understand like, oh, this is why I'm going to target this. Like this is why it's so crucial. And then I kind of went on to more of like a discussion instead of any methods because it's a literature review. So I gave each drug, each of the 10 drugs a section, and then I gave an overview. So in each section of the drug, I gave an overview of what the drug is, what the drug targeted, and I summarized the results of the study. Like what did they find? Was it effective? And like did it harm the patients or whatnot? And then afterwards, at the end, I just gave a summary and then a conclusion of all the significant findings.
That's really interesting. I would love to read it sometime. That's very cool. Are you hoping to get it published potentially?
Yes, a couple of days ago, I think I submitted it to be published. Yeah.
Amazing. Which platform are you hoping to publish it at?
I think it was called the International Journal of High School Research.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting paper. I'm really thrilled to see that a lot of young students are doing research on these really important topics. And I think yours is especially interesting because, as you were saying, there isn't really a conclusive reversal of the disease. There are just things to kind of stagnate and quell it and quell the symptoms, ease people's pain. But I think it's really admirable to actually focus on, how do we actually undo the damage that's done, or actually entirely prevent it somehow. Yeah, and I just want to ask you about if you had any kind of tips or tricks or advice for anyone who is about to undertake a similar research paper. What would you say to them? Like, what things kind of helped you more? What things did you tend to avoid? What things did you want to look out for, or definitely make sure you do? I would love to hear a bit about your experience in academia and what you'd recommend for anyone just starting out.
Yeah, so I would say there are a couple of things that I could share. First off is the thing that I learned was be curious, keep on asking questions. That's really the best way to find a topic, in my opinion. Because if you try to find a topic for the sake of finding a topic, it's really hard, in my opinion. Yeah. And also, um, I would say that planning is very important, especially for a literature review, because if you start too late, there's many papers to read and it can become very busy. So I would say that be mindful that there are going to be a lot of papers and they are hard to understand, but it's just like as you read more papers, like it becomes easier, and it's really important to manage your time that way. The last piece of advice I would give um, would probably be about the topic again, like finding a topic. The topic doesn't have to be very novel. It doesn't have to be like very like groundbreaking and like super compelling. If you have a simple topic and then you go very deeply into that, I think that's very valuable. And on a high school level, it's something that's very achievable.
I think those are some really great pieces of wisdom. I think that's great. I also, one of my kind of more closing questions, I want to hear a bit about how you found balancing the workload with now you're one-on-one with a professor, you're in a small, very small group setting, you're in a kind of higher level of academia, as compared to, you know, a big high school class with the teacher lecturing, teaching a kind of a unit within a lesson. This, I think, is a lot more at the same time hands-on and hands-off because you're more one-on-one, but it's also, you have, the onus is kind of on you to create your own paper and motivate yourself and create your research. So I want to hear a bit about how you found that educational structural shift, like the kind of classroom setting, the kind of setting of the education itself, how you found that shift. Do you think it was challenging? Do you find it good? Do you find it very foreign? Do you find it doable, inspiring? I just want to hear a bit about your reaction to that.
I actually really liked the structure. It really allows for a lot of freedom, I guess. Because the class is so small, you can really ask a lot of questions to your professor. And I think it's very good because like the professor can spend time with you and on your paper and can give you like very valuable advice. That's something that I really liked. And the professor didn't give us too much homework, but also like reminded us of like, oh, this is like when you should be starting your research paper. This is like when you should have a topic. And he would also give us advice on that. And so I think that giving us freedom, like a lot of time to do the work that we need to, but while giving us deadlines really helped me to just like create a very original like research paper.
That sounds great. No, for sure. And I think your paper sounds absolutely brilliant. So yeah, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I learned a lot for sure. I am an English student, so I know not a lot about Parkinson's disease. And so I found it really interesting and really refreshing to see young academics conduct research that has never been done before. I think that's kind of what academia is all about, to push the ticket, push the bandwidth of what we already know and what we already have in our scholarship. And I think that's what your paper is doing. So I want to commend you for completing it, and I can't wait to read it. And I want to say thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. Amazing. Well, have a great rest of your day, and yeah, have a great one.
Yeah, you
Bye.
too. Thank you.